Hi, I'm Mark Peters. Welcome back to the DevSecOps track for the DevOps Online Summit. I'm here with Chris Riley from Splunk. Chris is obsessed with bringing modern technologies to those who need to solve real-world problems and going from unicorn to reality. I take it that's unicorn business, not a unicorn by supergluing a horn to a horse.
I wish. I've always wanted to be a centaur. So
right?
if anybody knows how to make that happen, please let me know.
So, in the spirit of not digressing too fast from the start, they said that if you were actually a centaur, you would have problems because in order to be the right size, you'd have to be like 3 times larger than a horse for the proportions to work. And
That's
then
disappointing.
The amount of food that you would have to eat, like the human stomach, wouldn't be related to the horse stomach, right? For the amount of grass and the just.
Of course, you have to ruin it with the details.
Well, it's a detailed process, right? Which is what we're talking about in the software development lifecycle, and how we're going through the process about apps and metrics. Chris has a very, very background. He speaks and talks all the time, other than about centaurs and the biological concerns. Hosts a podcast, Developers Eating the World, and Tech a Sketch. So if you have an inkling, go out and see those. But Chris, we'll let you get started. We'll kind of talk through this.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Mark. And one of the things, so my focus today really is in this idea of pipeline analytics. And the talk track is DevSecOps. So, first I should think I make the connection there. So we really see DevSecOps as being a practice. It's not a product you go and buy. It's not something that you accomplish one day and you're done. It's really a practice. And a big component of that practice in DevOps and observability is it has to be visible. So if it's not visible, then it has a shelf life. And there's really 3 key components to the DevSecOps practice. There's build more secure applications, secure the software factory, secure applications in production. Now, we're kind of familiar with the secure applications in production thing, but building more secure applications and securing the software factory is something that everybody's concerned about right now. Not a lot of organizations have dialed in. And I really believe that this practice the technologies around pipeline analytics is the path to doing that. It's the foundation of doing that because, like I said, the practice has to be visible. Well, how do you make something visible? You have to take the telemetry from what's going on, activities, tools. You have to visualize them. And then you have to be able to use that visualization and that data in a meaningful way to know, are we doing good? Are we doing bad? Is somebody trying to expose the software factory because this is now a part of our attack surface? And that's really where pipeline analytics comes in. And the first part of this is convincing you and everybody else that your software delivery chain is an application. Now that we do everything as code, infrastructure as code, we talk about this all the time. You're scripting stuff, you're versioning it. It is an application. It is an application whose customer is the developer or the application being deployed via that. And I think that this is a really important mindset to get into because if you consider your software delivery chain to be an application, that means it has to be operable, it has to be securable, and it has to be measurable. You have to know what's going on. You have to know if you're doing good or bad. And you have to make sure that it's up and running. You have to make sure that your CI/CD process is up and running. Your secrets management tool is up and running. All of that stuff, all the same stuff you would do for an application. And that's just a key element of just a healthy software delivery practice. Does that make sense?
So, Chris, I completely understand. I'm all in with the continuous measurement, continuous monitoring. And you made the point about transparent, so that because it has, if it's not transparent, it has an expiration date. I think it's the opposite. I think the problem is if it's not transparent, you don't know what the expiration date is, right? You go and grab that can out of the cabinet for the pantry that you said, "I'm going to make chili," and you get it out there,
it's already
been expired, right, for 4 years.
That's technical debt. Yeah,
you don't know where the stink is in the process because it's all hidden back in there.
Technical debt happens no matter what. But if you can't see the technical debt, then you don't even know it's there. Like something festering.
There's an important dichotomy here, right, between the two teams. And you talk about the developers making their stuff observable and measurable, but the security teams have to do that too. And that's where historically been the problem. Is that you got to be
Hmm.
able to come in there and say, this is what we're doing for security, and this is what we're worried about all the
Yeah.
time, and not just at audit time.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of what we've been seeing is that the security professionals are becoming more and more concerned about what happens in the software delivery chain. And you have this whole shift left security movement. What do they really care about? They want confidence, right? They want to be confident that the developers and the DevOps engineers are doing what they need to do to build more secure applications. What is that? Vulnerability scanning, code quality scans, making sure that people don't from the outside are not getting access to the repos. One of the recent ones that kind of blew up 2 weeks ago was not pulling images down, Docker images down from a public repo. Only use your private repos for that. Don't go pulling down images from a public repo for your build. So things of that sort. Now, how do they get that information? Well, in a lot of scenarios, they have to literally go down the hall, or they have to have a conversation with the DevOps team. Is like, I need to know what you're doing. I need to know how you're doing it. If it's compliance and auditing, it's even worse because that's a multi-week process where they have to gather the data and give it to the security team to give them an understanding of what's going on. So one of the things we see with pipeline analytics is that the security professionals are speaking the same language as the developers, and they can go and look up this information without getting in the way. Because I don't believe that security teams anymore are trying to be the department of no. I think they understand that they want to facilitate application velocity, but they also want to make sure that the road is paved to do that in a safe, meaningful way. And the more opportunities they have to go and hunt something down, that's what disrupts the whole process. And so that's why I really think that this visibility is in everybody's benefit. And it's not a huge lift for most organizations, I think, to embrace pipeline analytics as breadth of visibility across the delivery chain.
One of the ones we try to offer with our own local team is once the product is out there, we do baseline scans on like a monthly basis, right? To say what we've already delivered. Then we encourage the developers to compare their same scans as they're building and testing against those baselines and say, make sure you're not adding risk to the process. Or if you do, let's sit down and talk about it.
Yeah, there is this. You implemented knowledge sharing at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
you've implemented this transfer of understanding and knowledge back, and that truly is shift left in a very systematic way. And sometimes I think that happens organically, systematically. There's a very famous clothing manufacturer out there that has a very large retail presence that their security team hosts hackathons with the development team and bug bounties with the development team in order to create that rapport and that back and forth. So I think that's really cool.
Well, and we have the discussions too, right? So you talk about stories and bringing things up. Is our team actually ships hardware, so we ship hard drives out. And the team came to me and said, "Well, the vulnerability requirement says I have to have my virus update within 7 days of production. Can I put that in the documentation? Just turn it to 7 days of turning it on because I don't know when they're going to turn it on after I produce it and I, download it on the drive. And if I download it on the drive and ship it on the first, they might not actually install it until the middle of the next month. Like, yeah, we'll put that in there, right? We can work with that because you're still
That's it.
meeting the
Yeah.
intent of the pipeline.
Yeah. So you reminded me of something that I had this big conversation with people, and so we talk a lot about in paving the road, guardrails, etc. And sometimes you have to have this moment of introspection where in your technical career, have you rewritten the test so that it passed? Have you changed the documentation so that there's plausible deniability and I'm still checking the box, right? That happens to everybody. Everybody is a part of that. And so you always have this push and pull between like what is the human problem and what are the things that we can establish that facilitate the proper behavior without getting in the way. And that's a really big technical challenge. There is no badge of holder. There is no single pane of glass. Right? Like that doesn't exist. But there are practices, and what I'm advocating for here is that pipeline analytics is one of those practices that certainly help pave that road and certainly help make that communication less nuanced and ad hoc and subjective. When you say that, though, you just reminded me, I think I need to run an update on my NAS. I know I get paranoid on my NAS. If there's a little thing that says there's an update you need to run, I run that thing right away because of security reasons.
But it's that common frame of reference with the analytics, right? They can't be one team's analytics. For a pipeline analytic, they need to be communicable. That's not the best word with COVID.
Shared.
But, translatable to all the teams, right?
Yeah. In the world of legacy kind of traditional log management, you did see a lot of data hoarding and fiefdom building when it came to logging platforms. Like, these are my dashboards. I only get to look at my dashboards. Nobody else can look at my dashboards. And there was different reasons for that. The thing is, with most of this data, it's read-only. So the actual risk, I mean, if you're in a healthcare and financial, it's a little bit different. But the actual risk of exposing these dashboards is more on the confusion wasting time side than exposing information side. But a lot of times IT would withhold that stuff. One of the interesting reasons I found for this was it was too good at creating visibility, and they didn't want to share the things that were going wrong. They didn't want to make it obvious the things that weren't working. But by not doing that, they're creating their own type of technical debt that could be addressed. And I think, again, that's a cultural problem.
There's that one culturally, and there's the one where you have guys that have been coming up to the boss for years and saying, hey, if we put this server in, we'll be able to save the work of 3 people. If we put this automation in, we'll be able to save the work of 3 people. And I was in the Air Force for a long time, and they got to the point where they turned around and said, okay, you said this for years, and we have the comments on the budget. Prove it. We're going to get rid of 30% of your manpower because you said you don't need it anymore.
And being held accountable for those types of decisions, I think, makes a lot of sense. I mean, really what we've been talking about here is the visibility silos. But yeah, I think both vendors promise, teams promise. One thing I really like in the agile practice is that there is this idea of say versus do, commit versus do. And you actually calculate it as a ratio. Like, okay, we said we were going to do this thing in this amount of time, and this is what we actually delivered, and you get scored. But those can also be very dangerous. So the nuances of that human side, I think, cause a lot of problems. But also, that's where this idea of let's not lead with blame. Let's lead with our objectives in mind. And like you said, what we're trying to do here is create a language that is everybody understands. And we talk a lot at Splunk about a common information model. So all the data we collect maps to a common information model so that once I know that common information model, if I am a CISO, I can look at your dashboard and I can more or less understand what's going on. At the service level, maybe not. But from a general perspective, I understand what's going on. If I'm a DevOps engineer, I understand what's going on. And that's absolutely key to breaking down these information silos. If you're not willing to share, that's an organizational problem.
Yeah, now you're twisting my mind all around. So if I'm interfering too much, you got to back me back out here and talk, right? Because I'm thinking about the fact that if you're not willing to share because you think it creates a vulnerability for you to another team, that really is a very, very severe cultural issue, right? You want to be as most visible as possible, as much visible as possible. And you want to have that transparency all the way from start to finish. In getting to it might be challenging, but that doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile end goal. Like you mentioned, the do versus commit, and it talks back to the John Doerr and the objectives and key results, right? As they weren't designed to be 100% done every time. And he even says, if you design it that way, you're failing because you've made it too easy.
I have actually run into real world scenarios where the customer didn't want to buy the tool because it made things too visible. And it was kind of like, you're airing my dirty laundry and you're making it too easy to see it. And that's like a huge problem. I don't know how you fix that problem. I mean, that's definitely somebody from the top down needs to say, like, this has got to stop. We need to move on.
It's both, right? And the cultural fix, another book I wind up reading a lot, right? The Netflix, the no rules rules, that talks about having the blame free, that you can stand up in a meeting and tell the CEO he's wrong because here's where your data is, right? And that's just part of the culture. And it's what
Mhm.
you're talking about.
Honestly, the way some of these shifts happen is that good people leave crummy organizations and they move in favor of, really top tier talent moves in favor of that Netflix situation where it is more conducive to productivity and getting stuff done, so that the legacy organizations stuck with that culture are in a bad spot trying to acquire new talent, and they have, this whole attrition bleed of mind share, and they can't move to the next step. And we know, I mean, what's the reason we're having this conversation? Everybody is a tech enabled enterprise. They're concerned about delivering better software faster. That's why we're here. That's why that term that we're
Right?
all so in love with exists. And if a company is not executing on it, it impacts them. I know during this lockdown, like, we unsubscribed from a virtual training program just because the application was bad. The content was probably really good. The application, if you're a techie, you can kind of see from the outside in that this was not built very well, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so it reflects on the bottom line, and that's when companies really start to care. On the positive side, I've dealt with railroad companies who have embraced this, and they're doing an amazing job. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with where your company is in the spectrum of unicorn or not. It's that culture. Yeah.
So, I mean, I can find it easily clear that the railroad companies want to see where everything is because that's kind of that should be inherent in the culture, right?
Yeah, I guess, what's interesting with the types of applications they're dealing with customer applications where they notify the customer where their stuff is. They're dealing with IoT type applications where they want to make sure that the quality of their delivery services is on par. If it's a refrigerated unit, they need telemetry from the refrigerator to know that everything's good. And if it's not good, notify somebody. That's more of an internal support application than the external application. And even there, they're having conversations about DevSecOps
Well,
and observability and all of these things that a lot of people have attributed to the hoodie wearing startups. But these are problems everybody are facing. And I think that the organizations that try to turn a blind eye for now, and the other thing that you hear a lot is like, oh, we did this 10 years ago. It's not new. We're good. And don't reframe how they look at their practice. It's going to become obvious soon that they're behind.
I'll twist that one back on you and say that's a basic of lean, right? That it's observability throughout the practice and throughout the supply chain of what it is they're doing.
Hmm.
And that the more observability you give to the customer, the more likely the customer is to trust what you're doing. That if you
That's
can show them where the car is, what the refrigeration rate is for something they're shipping, at what time, at any time they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and want to know where it is and what temperature it's at, they can wake up and see it and have confidence that that's what they're seeing because it's observable throughout. Same thing as
yeah.
I'm sure you've seen with UPS and FedEx, right? You can see where your package is at any stage of delivery,
Yeah, I know. 2 days ago, these headphones, they hadn't arrived yet. I was getting kind of mad, and
right?
and we had a massive snowstorm here, and I should be reasonable and say, well, the snowstorm should, but no, I was still upset.
Are you in Texas? You're on the East
Colorado.
Coast. Colorado. Oh, Colorado got like
Yeah,
4 feet, right? We had ours like 2 weeks ago. So
yeah. So visibility is absolutely key. The thing with pipeline analytics that I've been really surprised, and why I've been so hot on this topic, is that so few organizations are doing it, and it's not that hard. So how do you do it? how do you implement pipeline analytics? Well, first thing is the data. You have to have the telemetry from your tools. Let's say it's secrets management tool. Let's say it's vulnerability scanning tool. So the tool you use to scan your artifacts to make sure that you don't have any vulnerabilities before deploy. You got to get the logs from it. You have to get the metrics from it. Your secrets management tool, you got to get the logs from it. You need to understand the access from the outside world to your code repositories, et cetera. This is all part of securing the factory. Step number one, and it's there, but a lot of times the organizations, it's nascent data. They just don't touch it for whatever reason. Then you have to visualize it. And what we see is that it gets visualized in three primary use cases. Monitoring. So is my tool up and running? That's your typical monitoring. Measuring. Are we doing well or are we not doing well? These are KPIs like mean time to failure, change failure rate, things of that sort. And a lot of people reference DORA metrics, but I would caution anybody to consider DORA metrics a standard. It's being used as almost a pseudo standard, but it's not a standard. And then you have auditing. That's the one that's not fun. That's the one who somebody comes down and they're like, I need to know everything, and you're not prepared to give it to them. And that's a massive use case. And again, you have the telemetry. You can have that audit data in real time so that you look at, is somebody running root policy on our services? Why are they doing that? They shouldn't be using root or whatever it is. What is the access from the outside world? That's usually how the visualizations come together. So you usually have dashboards for monitoring, dashboards for KPIs, dashboards for auditing. Each one has a different persona that owns it, but they're visible to everybody. And you know where they are. So that's usually how we see it implemented. And it's not a huge lift. That's the thing that really surprises me is if you have a visualization tool, pick your favorite tool, it's not a major leap to get to pipeline analytics and then use that data to grow your business and understand what's going on and have a better picture of your attack service in your software delivery chain.
So I find, and I've had a couple of talks, right, about, going from basic metrics to advanced metrics, right, that if you're still getting growth through your monitoring, measuring, auditing, you don't really need anything advanced because you get enough growth. But the problem is that sometimes you don't have the fidelity to do all three things from one, right? You have your pipeline in place, you have your CI/CD tool, but your team has only decided to pay for the basic version, which tells you pipeline success versus pipeline failure. And 70% of your pipelines are succeeding, but you've set up 35 different pipelines to run, each with a different set of build, test, try stages and different software it's running. And you can't pick out which pipeline is running at which success rate, when, or how often, or any of those things you think would be nice.
This exact challenge you mentioned is really interesting to me because it's not a challenge any tool is going to fix for you. There isn't a single tool out there, unless you're like all in one vendor. There isn't a single tool out there that is just going to automagically put all of that together for you, because this is an information architecture problem. It's having a common information model problem. One of the things that is a common challenge is the relationship between your backlog and your CI/CD process, or your artifact management and your CI/CD process. If in your jobs you don't have ticket numbers, then there's no way to know that this ticket was associated with this. And what you're talking about is exactly that fidelity, or I say resolution, is that the most that you can do with your backlog in that case is ticket open date, ticket close date. And just assume that if the ticket was closed, it was done. But it may not be done. There may be various reasons that the ticket was closed.
So what we're talking about was having observability throughout the system, right? And how do you convince somebody? How do you get that one central dashboard? Now, I've seen some that have started to combine a couple of those things, so you can have some good deals or some better information, even down to which developer submitted which pipeline on which day, and statistics for which developers were running how many pipelines. But I'm still not sure they had that fidelity of who was doing it, right? One of our cases was the developers turned off security because their builds were taking 2 to 3 hours, and when they added the security build in, it took 6 hours, and they didn't want to wait. So they backed them all off until they merged everything through the week, and at the end of the week they ran the security builds on it. That's not quite what the ideal was, but
yeah, we had with our own internal DevOps team. It wasn't that dramatic. It was something to do with the actual build images and reducing build times, and it was a great success. Absolute use case for pipeline analytics. But I think the first thing is like, the question I hear is, who owns this? Who's the steward of this? I've seen DevOps engineering teams be fantastic stewards of this data. I've seen SREs be fantastic stewards of the data. Having a good understanding and architecture of what is expected, like what sort of metrics should I be able to see in any dashboard. What we do, I know, with our cloud native development teams is this idea of like global dashboards that is relevant to everybody. And then you have the service level dashboards. So these are like nitty gritty stuff, metrics that only the service owners are going to care about. And it's 2-3 clicks in before you can get that. But you have to have naming conventions. I mean, it's something so basic. Naming conventions, such that everybody uses the same naming convention, so that when they're navigating dashboards, they have a general understanding of where they are in the world, versus something that's just totally obscure related to something that they don't know anything about. And that's just a really basic thing. This challenge of like, who owns it, who's the steward, and is part of the reason I think SRE role came to be, is that there does need to be a steward. And I haven't seen yet today a good foundation of stewardship from security to development. And maybe you have, but I haven't seen it yet today. I know the SRE does a really good job of being the steward from what happens in production to development, but not security so much.
I think that's still waiting on the cultural change, because you go to I go to the development team and I say, here's what I want a metric for. So, well, why do you need to know that? Because it's a clear path that I'm delivering. Right? So, well, how come you need to know that? I want to know how much risk you introduce. Well, we ran the security test. Isn't that enough? No. I mean, you've got your binary check in your pipeline. Yes, you ran the security test. What did you do with it? Well, nothing. But we ran a security check.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're secure.
Yeah. And I think this element of accountability, like I have to personally care about security. Now, if you're a developer and you're watching what's in the news and you don't have some sort of angst about your code being the result of a major exploit, yeah, like maybe you need to pay attention a little bit harder. Because I have angst and I'm not a developer anymore, but building secure applications, like that's a scary thing. You're giving up customer data because of an exploit that is in your code. That's terrifying.
I agree with you, Kevin. I'm going to go back one step and then go forward. I'm going to go what everybody was thinking of when you said, hey, you need a naming convention. And they're thinking, of course I have a naming convention. It's my project 1, my project 2, my project redo, my project redo 1.
And then
everybody can find their way through that. I mean, yes and no, that you have to be accountable, right? That you're delivering it for a purpose and you're delivering to a metric against the best checks you know how. Once you deliver it, Ford or Audi or Subaru doesn't worry about it anymore, other than to make a recall and bring it back. And we do that. The code doesn't work, you submit a new patch, right? It's done and we've moved on.
Yeah, the digital factory. I mean, you're absolutely right. So you can't intuit everything always. Like there's two basic ways of looking at security, right? Is trying to prevent stuff from happening, or trying to be really good at responding to stuff when it happens. And I think you have to have both. I know for my home security, I tend to take I want to be able to be really good at responding to something when it happens. Maybe I'm not so good at preventing things from happening.
So I'd offer another one. Maybe it's a combination of the two. I'd actually advocate that you want to be so far ahead that by the time they catch up to your vulnerability, you're already on to the next thing.
Yeah. I heard a really interesting concept about that, which is similar to fuzzing in code. It's you change stuff very frequently so that once they identify a common pattern of attacking your code, you've already changed it. I think
And you've
that's
already gone
similar,
to the next step, right? And
right?
I mean, yeah, absolutely, I'll respond if there's a mistake, but my plan is to be already delivering by the time they're finding the last mistake, which is still
Yeah,
building secure code. You're just kind of building it in a different manner. You're not building it secure from vulnerabilities. You're building it secure to the so that you're working ahead of everybody else.
yeah. Which I think implies investment in potentially chaos engineering, pen testing, and really this idea of continuous verification. Can I do vulnerability scans in production such that I released an artifact that wasn't vulnerable the day that I launched it, but is now has a known vulnerability, and respond to it and roll back or update it in that case probably before I actually get exploited. I think you're right. I think it's important to have those practices.
Well,
One thing that scares me though is that a lot of organizations don't have the automation even to do the deployments to begin with, much less be ahead of the game. But that's a North Star. You should always have a North Star.
well, and it's the dependencies, right? If you haven't reduced your dependencies to start with, then you can't deliver the pieces of code that are needed to move on. We go back to the SolarWinds case where they had something and they'd already moved past it, right? The patches were in place. The problem was that the hack was 6 months before and they hadn't gone back, and people that were supposed to do the patches hadn't done the patches and hadn't made the adjustments to move forward to the next step, or were using a shortcut. And then even when they found it, it only took them less than a week to put out a new patch and a couple days for the other team to go in. I think it was GD to go out and own the other website, right, and turn on the kill switch so that it wouldn't work anymore that way. And but that's a detect issue, almost from an ops side as much as it is from a build side.
Yeah, it's funny. I just realized you should probably have a drinking game for your track anytime somebody says solar winds. But it's such a perfect example of securing the software factory. I mean, you don't get a better example than that. And that awareness is huge. But the punchline here is this, that your software delivery chain, treat it like an application, which means make sure you can operate it, measure it, and it's visible. And pipeline analytics is not a significant lift to get there. However, you did illustrate some of the roadblocks, which are you can make one thing really visible and another thing that is complementary to it not visible at all. And by virtue of that dichotomy, have challenges in how you measure because you will optimize to what is most visible. That is a real challenge for everybody. Just because it's easy to measure, you might optimize to that particular scenario, whether it's one CI/CD tool or one backlog system, whatever it is. But in any case, every organization should be working towards building that code to cloud visibility, which is what happens when a feature is defined to when that feature is running in production and potentially there's an incident around it, because everybody's on the same page, which is paving the path for rapid software delivery, and you have more and better context in production so that you can remediate issues faster.
And I'll say too, as we've been staring at this slide for a while, if you monitor everything like you just said, like you're supposed to, and you have all those numbers available, and you're measuring it in ways that matter to your organization, you should never have to worry about that use case for an audit, because that data should
That's
always be
true.
there, and you can always
It's
make
there.
the argument of, hey, we did it. We told you. If you didn't do anything with it, that's not our fault. We told you, 6 months ago that here's where it is, and here's your little file where you could have pulled it up.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's there by default.
Hopefully, if
Yeah.
everybody else is doing what they're supposed to.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mark. This was great.
Thanks, Chris. No, it's been a good chat. I enjoyed it very much. So again, this has been the DevSecOps track for the DevOps Online Summit. We've been here with Chris Riley from Splunk. We've been talking about analytics for your pipeline. Uh, and hopefully you'll join us for this talk as well as many more. Have a great day.